My name is Rosemary Harlan. I am 72 years old, a widow, and a woman who has spent most of her life with flour-dusted hands, an apron tied around my waist, and a heart full of stories baked into every loaf I ever made. I live in Savannah, Georgia, a place where Spanish moss sways slowly from oak trees like nature's own curtains, where the air carries a sweet mix of rain, history, and butter from neighborhood bakeries. Funny enough, I used to own one of those bakeries. Harlan's Hearth, a small corner shop with warm yellow lighting, cracked wooden shelves filled with sweets, and a little bell above the door that rang like a gentle greeting every time someone stepped inside. I wasn't famous, but in our town, my cinnamon rolls were legendary. People used to say they weren't just baked, they were comfort wrapped in sugar. I started that bakery with my late husband, Richard, a man whose laugh could soften the hardest days. We ran it together for 37 years. His job was charm, mine was baking. He greeted customers like old friends, even if he'd just met them. I measured dough by instinct, not cups. We worked in seamless rhythm, like flour and sugar, never complete without the other. But 7 years ago, Richard passed away quietly in his sleep, leaving behind an empty chair at the kitchen table, a silent side of the bed, and a bakery that suddenly felt too heavy to run alone. After his funeral, I opened the shop for just one more week. Customers lined up, not for pastries, but to hug me. They said they'd miss Richard's voice more than the taste of maple buns. I locked the doors for the last time after that. The bell jingled as it closed behind me, and that sound still echoes in my chest some nights. I retired after that, though retirement for me didn't mean rest. It meant finding smaller ways to give pieces of myself to others. I began hosting weekend baking sessions for local teenagers, kids who needed guidance, distraction, or simply a scent of home they never could quite describe. I didn't charge money. They paid me in stories, laughter, and sometimes tears. My kitchen remained warm, even if my heart had cold corners. Some nights, after everyone left, I'd wash the measuring cups slowly, just to hear the tick of water, reminding myself I was still part of life, still needed, still breathing into something meaningful. My neighbors called me the gentle oven of the street because warmth always radiated from my home. The inside of me didn't always match the outside, but I learned long ago that people who hurt quietly have the softest hearts. The only thing I ever feared, even more than loneliness, was becoming someone who no longer served a purpose. So I kept baking, kept guiding, kept offering slices of pie and pieces of myself to anyone who showed up. Little did I know, life had saved its biggest lesson and heartbreak for the years I assumed were meant for peace. I have 2 children. When I say have, I don't mean by flesh alone. I mean by love, labor, laughter, sleepless nights, worry lines, and prayers whispered into the dark. Caleb Harlan, my biological son, is 38 years old. He works in logistics, coordinating shipments for a freight company. He speaks with confidence, dresses in crisp shirts, and carries his father's firm jawline. He is intelligent, practical, and believes the world bends best when approached with control and structure. He isn't cold, just wired to solve life like a list of tasks. Then there is Ayla Harlan, my adopted daughter, 36 years old. Her story came into my life when she was just 3 years old. She had soft curls, knees bruised from a childhood too unprotected, and eyes filled with questions no toddler should carry. Her biological mother wasn't able to take care of her, and the foster system shuffled her too fast for a small heart to keep up. When she was placed, in our home, she arrived with a tiny pink backpack and a fear of loud sounds. No toys, no parents, no bedtime stories tucked into her memories, just survival instincts in a toddler body. I didn't adopt Ayla because I wanted a second child. I adopted her because every child deserves arms that don't let go. The moment she fell asleep on my lap the first day, clutching my sweater, her breathing uneven like she expected to be moved again. I made a promise in my heart. Not loud, not spoken, but locked forever. No more temporary love for her. Caleb was 5 at the time, and contrary to the idea that children resist such changes, he welcomed Ayla like she arrived with sunshine in her little fists. He shared his toys, his blanket, even proudly introduced her to school as my sister, but rare addition. The house felt fuller after she came, messier, louder, softer in all the right places. Richard used to say, Ayla glued the cracked parts of our family we didn't even know existed. As the children grew, their differences sharpened. Caleb was logic, Ayla was emotion. Caleb spoke loud and factual. Ayla listened, observed, absorbed. She had a gentle spirit, the kind that felt too much and apologized for taking space in the world. Even when praised, she looked surprised. Even when loved loudly, she wondered if silence would replace it one day. I tried my best to balance motherhood like two scales that refuse perfect alignment. If Caleb got structured guidance, Ayla got emotional reassurance. If Ayla needed softness, Caleb needed grounding. They received love, but in different languages. As a mother, that was never favoritism. It was translation. But children don't always see the intention behind the effort. Sometimes they only see the difference, not the necessity. And as the years stacked high, the subtle cracks between them widened like slow but unstoppable shadows. Losing Richard changed each of us in ways no warning could prepare us for. Grief is strange like that. It doesn't knock equally. Caleb turned inward, building walls out of responsibility, deadlines, and neatly packed emotions. Ayla unraveled in the opposite direction, feeling absence like a storm that kept circling her heart. Even though the loss was shared, the ache was personalized. After the bakery closed, I worried most about Ayla. She carried sadness like an uninvited guest, always present, always silent. She never asked for help, but she leaked hurt in the small moments, flinching at sudden sounds, apologizing too often, drifting into overthinking silences. Caleb noticed too, but was unsure how to speak in a language shaped by vulnerability. He loved her, but like a man who fixes leaking roofs instead of naming the storm. I began encouraging Ayla to spend more time with the teens in my baking sessions. Flower therapy, I called it. Kneading dough demands presence. The body can't spiral when the hands are busy shaping something hopeful, and slowly it helped. Ayla smiled more, spoke more, even tattooed tiny stars on her wrist to remind herself that small lights still shine in dark hours. Caleb, meanwhile, threw himself into work. He began working extra hours, chasing promotions, chasing security, chasing a version of life where unpredictability couldn't touch him. I admired his ambition, but somewhere in that climb, he learned to see emotions as disruptions, not messengers. To the world, we looked like a steady family, one strong mother and her 2 grown children navigating life respectfully under one sky, and for the most part, it was true. But grief does not always explode. Sometimes it becomes a slow fog that settles between people who once didn't need names to understand each other. At the dinner table, conversations shortened. Laughter grew calculated instead of accidental. Where there used to be shared silence filled with comfort, now lingered shared silence filled with unsaid thoughts. I tried stitching the gaps with casseroles, weekend board games, and gentle check-ins no one admitted they needed, but everyone slightly softened under. I thought time would soften the sharper edges. They needed, but everyone slightly softened under. I thought time would soften the sharper edges. I believed love alone could mend everything it touched. I was wrong. Not because love was weak, but because pain had been given too much time to make friends with pride. What I didn't see coming was how quietly a family can drift apart, even while living within talking distance of each other. The tension started subtly, then steadily. like ink spreading on tissue paper. Caleb began making comments, small at first, disguised as jokes, sharp only if held under emotional light. Ayla gets away with murder and still gets cookies, he once said, chuckling, but his jaw stayed still. I brushed it off as sibling teasing until the punchlines stopped laughing along. Ayla never rebutted. She absorbed. That was her nature. She didn't defend. She retreated. Caleb, on the other hand, believed fairness came in visible measurements. If effort was equal, love should look identical. He didn't understand that love isn't a twin outfit stitched in sameness. It is tailored differently for different wounds. No one teaches you that emotional math looks unfair if you only recognize numbers and not scars. The subject of our home, savings, and future security finally opened the door to the unspoken storm. One evening, while we were clearing dishes, Caleb mentioned logistics of aging, caretaking, inheritance, the practical pillars of adulthood. Sensible topics? Responsible, even. But Ayla stiffened at the unspoken implication. Where did she fit in the future he was designing without emotional footnotes? I said gently, "We'll cross those bridges together as a family when the time comes." Caleb responded, not unkindly but rigidly. Planning earlier avoids chaos later. Ayla sat quietly for a beat too long before saying, "Sometimes planning too hard forgets the people standing in the plan." A small silence arrived, heavy with weight no one lifted. Caleb blew out a breath. "I just don't want surprises, that's all." Ayla whispered, almost to herself, "Some surprises are people." He didn't hear her, but I did. Days later, the small matches became a fire no one tried to blow out. One comment, one misunderstanding, one layered insecurity sparked into a confrontation that carried every unspoken hurt from years before it. "You always take her side," Caleb said, louder than intended. Ayla's face drained, familiar disappointment settling like an unwelcome returning season. "And maybe," she said, voice trembling at the edge of fragile, "maybe that's because I was never on your side to begin with." Words hung in the air sharp enough to draw tears. My kitchen, once warm, felt suddenly colder than the Georgia winter outside. The argument that changed everything happened on an ordinary Tuesday, which, looking back, somehow makes it worse. It was never the dramatic days that broke us. It was the normal ones wearing masks. Caleb had come home tired, irritable, and emotionally short-circuited. Ayla had accidentally left her car keys on the counter next to his paperwork. A harmless thing. But frustration looks for outlets, and sometimes it uses the closest door. "Can anything ever stay organized around here?" he snapped, louder than the situation required. Ayla blinked once, twice, the way someone does when bracing for emotional impact. "It's just keys, Caleb. I'll move them." "It's never just anything, Ayla." The room stilled. My heart braced like someone hearing footsteps approach an old bruise. She tried to stay calm. "Why is this always a scoreboard?" He scoffed, pacing. "Because some of us clean up what others leave behind." Her breath hitched. "And some of us clean silently and still get blamed." Their eyes met, sparks lit by exhaustion and years of unpacked emotion. Caleb crossed his arms. "You've always had it easier." Ayla's voice dropped, not loud, but dangerously soft. The tone pain uses when it stops asking for permission. Easier or softer? He shook his head. "You wouldn't understand." She swallowed once, hard. "Maybe you never tried to understand me." I stepped forward then, voice gentle, hands raised not to silence but to soothe. "Enough. Both of you." But the moment had already built itself a throne. Ayla reached for her coat slowly, like someone retrieving a story they didn't want to tell aloud. Her hand shook, not with anger, but something deeper. She looked at me, eyes glassed with years of quiet battles she never asked anyone to fight. Then she said the sentence that cracked the foundation of our home. I think I was only tolerated, not chosen. The air left my lungs. Before I could reach for the heartbreak sitting openly in her voice, she walked out. No slammed doors, no dramatic exit. Just a daughter stepping outside too quietly, like someone who already practiced leaving in her heart long before her feet knew the way. I didn't chase her immediately, not because I didn't care, but because the kind of hurt she spoke wasn't the kind you interrupt with motion. It required stillness first, witnessing, not grabbing. But the silence she left behind was deafening. It roared louder than screaming ever could. Little did I know that silence was the beginning of the longest, coldest chapter our family had ever written. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, everything felt normal on the surface. The yard was covered in autumn leaves. Emma was learning pie recipes from me, and Julian kept talking about buying his first house. But one evening, something felt off. I was doing dishes when I overheard Julian whispering in the living room. His voice was tense, sharp, low. "I told you I'll fix it," he said. There was a pause. Then, "Just give me more time." I dried my hands and stepped closer, assuming it was work stress. But when he saw me, his face drained of color. The call ended immediately. "Mom," he said too quickly. "Just a friend." The way he said it didn't match the situation. My heart twitched, but I told myself not to overthink. Later that night, Emma came to my room, restless. She sat beside me and twisted the corner of the blanket the way she used to as a child. "Mum, I don't like how Jules has been acting." I asked what she meant, and she hesitated like the truth weighed too heavy. She finally whispered, "He's been borrowing money from people." A lot. I felt the floor shift mentally, like the world dipped downward for a moment. "For what?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "He won't tell me." The next morning, at breakfast, I confronted him gently. Julian slammed his cup down, coffee splashing onto the table. "Can we not do this, Mom?" he snapped. It was the first time he had ever raised his voice at me. The silence after was brutal. Emma left the table without eating. The kids pretended not to hear, but kids always hear everything. After he left for work, I checked the desk drawer, where important papers lived. What I found didn't look like Julian at all. Letters, notices, emails printed and folded, loans, cash advances, pending payments, and one red letter warning: final notice, asset review in process. My heart thudded violently. The word asset echoed in my head. The only meaningful asset we had was this house, the home I raised them in, the house Evan built with his own hands. The thought slithered into me like ice. I immediately texted Julian, asking him to come home. His response was one word: later. I went to the backyard and stood near the vegetable patches Evan once tended. The air felt thin. For the first time since he left this world, I truly felt alone. By the next day, the truth unraveled faster than I could brace for it. 2 men showed up at the door in suits, polite but polished, like people who didn't take no for an answer. They introduced themselves casually, almost kindly, then dropped the line that hollowed my bones. "We need to discuss Julian Carter's outstanding obligations." My mouth went dry. They weren't loud. They didn't need to be. One thing I learned in life: danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles. They told me Julian had borrowed heavily against future earnings, high-interest lenders, private agreements, fast loans. And the worst sentence came with a patient pause. Some of these liabilities are tied to family assets. I didn't invite them in. My legs felt numb anyway. When they left, the air still seemed restless. Emma came home right after, found me sitting on the front porch steps, and without asking, she just sat beside me. "It's bad, isn't it?" she said. I nodded. No speech, no drama, just the truth settling like dust. We finally talked in full that night. She explained that Julian had tried starting a tech idea, then another, then another. Each one flopped. Instead of stopping, he began borrowing to cover losses, then borrowing to hide borrowing. The hole grew deeper, and shame kept him silent. He didn't want to disappoint you, she whispered. But disappointment would have hurt less than betrayal. Much less. The next morning, Julian came home. He didn't apologize at first. He defended, then deflected, then finally cracked. It wasn't a dramatic breakdown. It was quiet. Empty. I thought I could fix it before anyone knew, he said. I wanted to make you proud. I wanted to scream that pride means nothing without honesty, but the words clogged in my throat. Instead, I said the only thing that mattered. This house isn't a token to gamble with, Julian. It's our roots. He closed his eyes, ashamed. I'm sorry, Mum. But some apologies land late. The wound was already open. The question hanging between us was heavier than his regret. What now? 3 nights later, I discovered something worse than debt. Deception. I woke up thirsty around 2 a.m. The house was silent, except the refrigerator humming like old houses always do. As I passed Julian's room, his door was cracked open, and faint light spilled into the hallway. I saw him sitting on the floor, surrounded by documents, sticky notes, files, and envelopes. His face looked worn, sleepless, like someone trapped inside his own mistakes. He didn't know I was watching. Then I saw it. An old brown file. The one that contained the deed to our home. My heartbeat kicked like a warning drum. His finger brushed the page, tracing words like someone memorizing an escape plan. My instinct yelled louder than my fear. I pushed the door fully open. The file snapped shut. Our eyes collided. No words, just impact. Mom? He stood up too fast. Papers slid to the floor. My voice came out steady even though my insides shook. Were you going to sign it away? He looked away. That was answer enough. Silence can confess louder than a voice. He didn't fight. He didn't justify. He dropped into the chair like a man whose exit doors were finally closed. I thought if I refinanced the house, I could buy time. By risking the only place your children sleep? I asked. His jaw clenched, shame tightening it like a chain. I picked up the file, held it to my chest, and walked out. That night I didn't sleep. Betrayal had a sound now, paper rustling in the dark. At breakfast the next morning, the atmosphere was fractured beyond glue. Emma knew something happened. She just didn't know how deep. When I told her, tears formed instantly, not loud, not explosive, but steady, the kind that mean trust is breaking, not sadness. She looked at Julian as if trying to find the brother she grew up with. He looked back like someone who didn't recognize himself either. You almost signed away our childhood home, she said quietly. Julian swallowed. I was trying to save us. You were saving your pride, she corrected. The table fell silent. Even the kids sensed the shift, poking at their cereal without eating. I noticed Emma staring at her coffee instead of drinking it. She blinked twice, her betrayal response. The same, one I had. Family fights are different from normal fights. Normal fights have winners. Family fights only have survivors. That afternoon, Emma packed a small bag, not to leave home, to leave the illusion. We need space, she told Julian. He nodded like a man who knew he no longer had the right to argue. I stood between them, realizing it wasn't sides being chosen. It was trust being reorganized. The house felt bigger without peace in it. Walls don't echo when they are filled with love. But when love hesitates, every footstep sounds like evidence. That night, I sat them both in the living room, not as a judge, as a mother who refused to let silence parent this family. We're not burying this in denial, I said. Julian braced himself. Emma held her breath. You made choices that put this family at risk, I continued, looking at him, and hiding it made it worse. He nodded without lifting his head. But, I said, turning to Emma, hurting him back won't rebuild us either. She blinked hard. Healing felt unfair when you're not the one who broke anything. Then came the line that shifted everything, a line spoken not in anger, but in clarity. You have 30 days to prove accountability, not promises, actions. Julian finally met my eyes, not defensive, not hopeless, human. I will, he said. For the first time in weeks, his voice sounded honest. Outside, winter tapped the windows gently, like life reminding us nothing stays broken forever. Not unless we choose to leave it that way. The next morning changed the rhythm of the house, not because things were fixed, but because honesty finally entered the room. Julian woke up before sunrise. I heard the shower running, footsteps steady instead of restless. When he came into the kitchen, he didn't speak excuses or regrets. He placed a folder gently on the table. This is every loan, every amount, every deadline, he said. No glossing, no hiding, raw numbers, raw truth. I opened it slowly. Seeing the damage laid out in black ink somehow hurt less than fearing it in the dark. Emma sat beside me without a word. The three of us looked at the papers like doctors reviewing scans. Diagnosis before treatment. I didn't hug him for honesty, but I respected it. Step 1 was truth, I said. Step 2 is action. He nodded. That day he didn't leave for work. He called instead. Speaker on. No shame filters. He spoke to lenders with a voice stripped of ego, negotiating extensions, asking for structured repayment rather than loopholes. Some laughed, some threatened. 2 actually listened. The calls were tense, brutal, humbling, but progress doesn't dress beautifully. It limps first. By evening, he had secured 3 revised payment plans. Not freedom, a roadmap. The kids unknowingly sensed the atmosphere thinning. Laughter returned in smaller sizes. Hope stitched itself slowly between silence. That night, for the first time in weeks, I saw Julian sleep without holding the weight of the world in his jaw. Progress didn't feel triumphant. It felt tired. Every morning, Julian updated me like we were co-managers of a sinking ship patching holes one by one. Emma didn't soften outwardly, but she stopped emotionally flinching at his footsteps. That was growth too. One evening, a lender agreed to reduce interest if payments started within 10 days. That was a ray of mercy we needed. But mercy usually asks for sacrifice. Julian sold his car the next morning. No emotional speeches. Just keys on the counter and a rideshare notification on his phone. I can't drive something I didn't earn cleanly, he said. Watching that moment made my throat burn. Consequences are painful, but choosing them willingly is healing. We tightened everything. Subscriptions cancelled. Eating out replaced with pantry meals. Coffee brewed at home. The house felt simpler, rawer, honest. The world outside didn't know our crisis, but inside, we were rebuilding a new family language, less proud, more accountable. One night, Emma knocked on Julian's. Dr. Shi didn't apologize or reconcile. She just handed him a planner. Debt dates, calls, and reminders, she said, since you forget when you panic. He swallowed hard. Thanks. That single word carried more peace than any dramatic reunion could. 30 days arrived quietly, like sunrise, unannounced but undeniable. Julian placed a new folder beside the old one. The first folder showed chaos. The second showed order. Payments made, calls logged, expenses cut, lenders updated, timelines structured. Not perfection. Proof. I didn't fix it, he said. But I stopped letting it own me. Emma exhaled slowly, the first exhale she allowed in weeks. Love in families often doesn't roar when it returns. It breathes. I stood up. walked to Julian, and this time I hugged him. Not because the debt was gone, but because the deception was. Accountability is love dressed in responsibility. That evening, we cooked together. No speeches, no ceremonies, just normal. The only miracle we needed. 6 months later, the house still stood. Not because the storms were gentle, but because honesty rebuilt the foundation. The debt reduced in slices, not miracles. Julian picked up freelance work at night. Emma handled budgeting like a quiet general. I managed calm, the hardest job. The neighbors never knew the chaos we survived. To them, we were Sunday lawn mowing people with normal lives. But normal is often born from war. No one witnesses. On the anniversary of Evan's death, I opened the window beside his old armchair. The breeze felt like a quiet handshake from heaven. Julian stood beside me. "I think Dad would say we took the harder but better road," he said. I smiled. He would say the house matters less than the family holding it up. The story didn't end with fireworks, or a giant loan vanishing, or a cinematic redemption speech. It ended with something steadier. Trust repaired not by time, but by proof, courage, and choosing truth when lies felt easier. Julian never became the hero of a dramatic comeback. He became something better, reliable. Emma never gave a speech about forgiveness. She lived it quietly, in checklists and shared dinners. As for me, I learned that parenting doesn't end when children grow up. It only changes difficulty levels. On a spring morning, Julian taped the final repayment confirmation on the fridge. No celebration, just a small magnetic clip shaped like a sunflower. He looked at me with steady eyes. Not perfect, but paid in full. I placed my hand on his shoulder. Then we moved forward in full. The house smelled like coffee and laundry and ordinary life, the scent of a family that almost broke but refused to shatter. No moral of the story typed in bold letters. Just a truth lived softly. Families are not tested by peace. They are defined by repair. And sometimes the strongest houses are built from the ruins no one else ever saw.